Welcome to Sleepy Expeditions. The wind is moving through the building. Not the wind of a broken window or an open door. There are no doors left on this floor. The frames long since rotted away or taken by the vines that have been working their way up the exterior for centuries. The wind moves through the building the way it moves through the forest it has become part of. Freely, without reference to the walls that were built to stop it, through gaps and openings and the slow structural changes that 800 years of weather and root and water have made in the concrete and the steel. The city below is a forest. You can see it through the gap in the ceiling, the canopy of trees that have colonized the lower floors and spread and merged with the trees from the adjacent buildings until the whole block is a continuous green mass, the original geometry of streets and intersections and sidewalks, invisible from above and barely visible from within. The city's grid surviving only as a slight regularity and the spacing of the largest trees, whose roots follow the old underground infrastructure that provides drainage, and whose growth is therefore slightly organized by the bones of what was here before. The stars are very clear tonight. No light pollution, no city glow on any horizon, no aircraft crossing the sky, no satellite trails, or very few. The satellites that were placed in orbit centuries ago having decayed from their orbits, and fallen and burned and been gone for a long time now. Just the stars, exactly as they are, the Milky Way visible from horizon to horizon, in the specific dense way it is only visible when nothing competes with it. You are the last human being on Earth, not the end, the completion. Find a comfortable position. The moss that covers the floor of this room has had decades to develop, and it is thick and soft in the way that moss becomes when nothing disturbs it, when the only thing that presses on it is the occasional small animal and the slow weight of its own growth. Close your eyes. The wind continues. The room is on the 43rd floor, or what was the 43rd floor, the numbering system that organized this building when it was built in the 21st century. Is no longer relevant to anything, the floors being defined now by their relationship to the forest rather than to each other. The lower floors are inside the canopy. The middle floors are at canopy level, where the light is green and filtered and the air smells of leaf litter and the specific compounds that trees release into the air on warm nights. This floor is above the canopy. The trees have reached it. There are saplings growing in the corners where soil has accumulated over the centuries, and a substantial fig tree has established itself through a gap in the south wall, its roots running down the exterior, and its canopy spreading above the roofline. But the main canopy is below, and from up here you can see over it the green expanse of the rewilded city stretching in all directions, interrupted by the taller ruins that stand above the trees, silhouettes against the night sky. The room smells of moss and old concrete, and the faint mineral smell of water that has been moving through the structure for a very long time. A building, given enough time, becomes geology. The moss under you is thick. It has been growing undisturbed in this room for a long time. Moss grows slowly, but a long time is a long time, and the accumulated growth of decades of undisturbed expansion has produced something that is, in its way, a kind of mattress, soft in the specific way that living things are soft. Not the softness of manufactured material, but the softness of something that is itself alive, that has its own texture and its own slight give, that responds to the weight on it in a way that feels like accommodation rather than mere compression. You found this room 3 years ago, not by searching. You were not searching for anything in particular. which is the specific freedom of being the last person on a planet that belongs entirely to you. You are moving through the building the way you move through all buildings now, with the attention of someone who knows that buildings are living systems in their own right at this point, that the relationship between the structure and the ecology that has colonized it is dynamic and occasionally dangerous, that a floor that was solid yesterday may not be solid today. The 43rd floor was solid. It had been spared the worst of the water damage by some feature of the building's design or materials, or simply by chance, the specific chance that determines which floors of a ruined building remain structurally sound and which do not. The moss was already established. The fig tree in the south wall was already substantial. The room had the quality of a place that had been arranging itself for a very long time in anticipation of being used. Some places wait without knowing they are waiting. You have been sleeping here every night since you found it. This was New York. You know this the way you know everything about the world before. Not from memory, which does not extend that far, but from the records and the objects and the specific geography of the place that make its former identity legible to someone who has spent a lifetime reading the ruins. The grid is the most persistent thing, even now, with the streets filled with soil and the soil filled with trees and the trees forming a canopy that obscures most of the surface from above. The grid of Manhattan's street plan organizes the forest. The avenues, wider than the streets once, and therefore accumulating more soil and supporting larger trees, are now the dominant corridors of the forest, the places where the canopy is highest and the understory is clearest. You can walk them, you often do. The specific regularity of the spacing, the slight openness of the avenue corridors compared to the denser growth between them, is the grid's survival in ecological form. The city did not disappear, it transformed. The buildings that remain standing are the ones built to last. Not all of them. Many of the buildings that were here in the 21st century were built to last 50 years, or 100, or until they needed to be replaced by something newer and more efficient. Those buildings are long gone, their materials recycled by the ecology of collapse, the concrete becoming substrate for moss and lichen, the steel corroding slowly into the soil, the glass becoming sand again over geological time. But some buildings were built differently. The ones that remain are the ones that were over-engineered for their time, built with stone and concrete in proportions that exceeded the structural requirements of the period, that provided in their excess of material the margin that has allowed them to stand through a millennium of neglect. The Empire State Building still stands, or most of it. The upper floors are gone, the steel and glass of the top having failed over the centuries, but the lower stone mass stands. It stands inside a forest now. Vines cover it to the 15th floor, and trees grow from every available horizontal surface, and birds nest in the ornamental details, and it is not recognizable as what it was to anyone who has not specifically studied the records. But it stands. You have stood at its base and looked up through the trees at the stone that goes up, and felt something that is difficult to name, not nostalgia, which requires a personal connection to what is lost, something more general. The specific weight of looking at a thing that was made by people and understanding how much effort the making required and how different the world was when it was made. The past is not absent, it is just present in a different form. It did not end quickly. This is the first thing to understand about the 1,000 years between the world that made this building and the world you inhabit now. There was no single catastrophe, no asteroid, no plague that swept through in a season, no war that ended everything at once. The ending was gradual. It was in some ways chosen. The population declined, not from disaster, or not only from disaster, from the specific combination of factors that demographers in the 21st and 22nd centuries tracked with increasing precision and discussed with increasing urgency. The birth rate falling below the replacement rate in country after country as women gained education and autonomy and chose smaller families. The aging of the existing population, the specific challenges of the late 21st century, the climate disruptions that displaced populations and stressed food systems and created the conditions for conflict, contributing to the decline without being its sole cause. Species do not always end in catastrophe. Sometimes they simply choose differently. The population that had reached 10 billion in the 21st century began to fall. Slowly at first, then faster. The demographic math of a below replacement birth rate is relentless. Each generation smaller than the last, the decline compounding across centuries in the way that compound interest compounds, but in reverse. By 2200 the population was 6 billion, by 2500 it was 1 billion, by 2800 it was in the tens of thousands. This was not suffering, or not only suffering. The centuries of decline were also centuries of change. The enormous pressure that 10 billion human beings had placed on the planet's systems reducing as the population fell, the ecology recovering as the demand on it decreased, the air and the water and the soil improving as the industrial civilization that had stressed them contracted and then ended. The last cities were small, communities of hundreds, then dozens. The social fabric of civilization maintained at smaller and smaller scales until the scale was too small to maintain it, and it became something else. Not civilization, but community, the older and more durable form of human social life that civilization had grown from, and that persisted after civilization was gone. You were born into one of the last communities, 37 people, in a place that had been a small town in what was once called New England. You were the youngest. You are now, as far as you know, the only. The last of something carries all the others without being able to ask them anything. The deer are on the street below. You can hear them, the specific sound of hooves on the compacted soil of what was an avenue, the occasional sound of browsing, the particular quality of silence that a deer produces when it is aware of something and has gone still to assess it. 3 of them, you think, possibly 4. They know you are here. They are not afraid. This is the thing that still surprises you, after a lifetime of it. That the animals are not afraid of you the way the records say they were afraid of humans in the centuries, when humans were numerous and armed and present everywhere. The deer that inhabit this forest have encountered humans. You, specifically, and before you the handful of people who were here in the last decades, and have reached their own assessment of what you are, not a threat. Fear is learned. The absence of the teacher changes what is learned. The birds have been the most visible inheritors. The city, every former city, is a nesting site of extraordinary productivity. The buildings that remain provide the cliff-like habitat that many bird species evolved to exploit. The ledges and cavities and protected spaces that birds use in cliff faces, replicated in the stone and concrete structures that fill the landscape. The population of birds in the former cities is, by some estimates, several times what it was when humans were present. The city ecology of the 21st century supported significant bird populations, but the rewilded city of the 31st century supports more. The combination of structural habitat and the productive ecology of the forest canopy creating conditions that are better for birds than either the original city or the undisturbed forest would have been alone. You watch them constantly, the falcons that have colonized the upper floors of the taller surviving buildings, the herons that stand in what were streets when those streets were flooded in spring, the enormous murmurations of starlings that form over the former parks in the evenings, the mass of them moving in the specific fluid way that has been called one of the most remarkable visual phenomena in the natural world. The world does not mourn what it fills. The wolves came back 3 centuries ago. You have seen them, a pack of 7, moving through the forest at a distance that suggests awareness of you without fear of you. The largest one, the alpha male, stopped and looked at you for a long time on the one occasion when your paths crossed closely. The look was not hostile. It was the look of an animal that is processing an unfamiliar thing, categorizing you, assessing you, deciding what you are in its understanding of the world. It decided you were not a threat. It moved on. The ocean is clean. This took centuries. The ocean that humans left behind in the 21st century was stressed in ways that would have seemed impossible to the people of earlier centuries. Warmer, more acidic, depleted of the fish populations that had been its most visible life, filled with the accumulated plastic waste of 2 centuries of industrial production that had not been designed with its own disposal in mind. The recovery was not quick, but the ocean has been recovering for 1,000 years, and the ocean is old, older than any human institution, older than the species itself, and 1,000 years of recovery, from the perspective of a system that operates on geological time, is significant. The coral reefs have returned, not the exact reefs that existed before the warming. The specific assemblages of coral species that characterize the reefs of the 20th century are not what exist now. Corals adapted, over generations of stress and selection, to the warmer waters of the late 21st century, and the species that now dominate the reefs are in some cases different from their predecessors. But the reefs exist. The fish populations that the reefs support exist. The sharks that the fish populations support exist. The ocean food web that was visibly disrupted in the 21st century has re-established itself in the centuries since, rebuilt from the populations that survived the disruption and the adaptation that the surviving populations underwent. Life does not require permission to persist. It requires only time and the absence of overwhelming pressure. You have seen the ocean. You walked to it. 3 weeks of walking through the rewilded landscape of what was once the northeastern United States, following the valleys that are now rivers again, through the forests that cover everything, until the land ended and the water began. The beach was empty, not empty in the way a beach is empty in the off-season, when the absence of people is temporary and the infrastructure of human use is present. Empty in the way that a place is empty when nothing designed for human use has been there for centuries. The dunes had reclaimed the boardwalks, the parking lots had cracked, and the cracks had become rivers, and the rivers had worked the asphalt into fragments, and the fragments had become part of the dune system. And the ocean was there, moving, alive, indifferent to the fact of your presence in the way that oceans have always been indifferent to the presence of humans, continuing its own enormous work of circulation and chemistry and biology, completely independent of what happens on the shore. The ocean was never ours. We borrowed the shore. The things that last are not what you would predict. You have spent years thinking about this. Which of the things that humans made will be visible in 10,000 years, in 100,000, in 1,000,000? The question is partly philosophical and partly practical, because you are surrounded by the evidence of what has lasted to this point, and you read it every day. Plastic lasts, or more precisely, the specific polymers that constitute most of what is called plastic persist in the environment for timescales that dwarf human civilization. They do not biodegrade, they fragment eventually into smaller and smaller pieces, but the molecular structure persists. The soil of the rewilded cities contains plastic particles that have been there for centuries. The ocean contains them at depths that have never been touched by light. This is the most durable thing the species made. Not the art, not the buildings, not the books. Paper lasts centuries under the right conditions, but the right conditions are rare and the wrong conditions are common, and most of what was written has been lost. The plastic is there, in the soil, in the water, in the bodies of the animals that filter the water, and the animals that eat those animals. The most lasting human legacy was the thing that was most carelessly made. The roads last longer than you would expect. The subsurface of a road, the compacted layers of aggregate that form the base beneath the asphalt surface, is a significant engineering intervention in the landscape, and it persists after the surface has failed. The old roadbeds are detectable in the landscape as subtle topographic features, slightly elevated, slightly more regular than the surrounding terrain, the drainage patterns around them still influenced by the subsurface that was placed there centuries ago. You follow them sometimes when you travel. They are not roads anymore, they are just slightly easier walking through the forest. The old roadbed providing better drainage and therefore better footing than the surrounding ground. But their linearity is human, the regularity of their curves, the specific logic of their routes connecting former population centres. All of this is still readable if you know what you are looking at. The cities themselves, even in their ruined and forested state, are the most visible legacy. Humans altered the landscape of this planet more thoroughly than any other species. The alteration persists. The stars are something else entirely. You have tried to describe this to yourself. The specific quality of the night sky without light pollution. And the descriptions are always inadequate because the description requires a comparison to something you have never experienced. You have never seen a sky with light pollution. The sky you have always known is the sky as it was before cities, as it was for the vast majority of human history. The full sky, the complete sky, the sky that made the earliest humans feel whatever they felt when they looked up at it. The Milky Way is a structure, not a smear, not a band of light. A structure with depth and variation and the specific density gradients that indicate different distances, different concentrations of stars, different clouds of gas and dust that are themselves astronomical objects of enormous scale. On the clearest nights you can see the dark nebulae, the patches within the Milky Way where dust clouds block the light of the stars behind them, creating the specific dark shapes that indigenous peoples around the world incorporated into their astronomical traditions as the most visible features of the sky. The sky humans almost lost is the sky that made them wonder. You have thought about this? In the centuries when the majority of humans lived in cities, the majority of humans had never seen the Milky Way, had never seen the sky that their ancestors looked at every night for 100,000 years. The light pollution of the industrial civilization had erased it for the majority of the species for roughly 200 years, a tiny fraction of the time the species had existed, but the fraction that included everyone who was alive at the peak. They missed it. Not in the sense of knowing it was gone, Most of them did not know what they were missing, had no reference for what the sky was supposed to look like, but there are records of the experience of seeing the Milky Way for the first time. People who travelled to dark places specifically to see it, who describe something that is not just visual, something that connects, something that lands in the chest and produces a quality of feeling that resists precise description. You feel this every night. The sky was there the whole time. The city was the interruption. You are the last person who remembers certain things. Not the history. The history exists in records, in the data that survived the centuries in formats that have remained readable, in the objects that are durable enough to outlast their makers. The history will outlast you. What will not outlast you is the living memory of the specific things that are too small for the records. The smell of bread baking. You have not smelled this in 20 years. The last person who baked bread was an old woman in the community you grew up in, who died when you were 15 and who produced in the last years of her life a bread that had a specific smell that filled the longhouse on the mornings she made it. The smell is not recorded anywhere. It exists only in your memory. When you die, it will be gone. Memory is not just what is remembered. It is who is doing the remembering. There are other things like this. The specific way a particular person laughed, not laughter in general, which is well documented, but the laugh of a specific person in a specific community who is now gone, whose laugh existed in the world for 60 years and was heard by a small number of people, and is now only heard in your memory when you choose to recall it. The specific quality of a particular afternoon, the light, the air, the sounds, the specific combination of sensory information that constituted being alive on a particular afternoon in a particular place with particular people who are now absent. These things are your inheritance from the people who came before you. And they are also, because you are last, the things that will end with you. You are not just the last human. You are the last memory of what being human felt like from the inside. This is not a burden you chose. It arrived with the situation. You carry it the way you carry other things that were not chosen. The cold at night, the weight of the moss under you, the specific geography of the world you were born into, with acceptance, with the occasional awareness of what it means. You speak to yourself. Not constantly. The habit of speech requires an audience, and the absence of an audience gradually reduces the impulse to speak, but you still have language. The words are still there, all of them, organized in the patterns that your community's language organized them, available when you reach for them. You use them, sometimes in your head, the internal monologue that is perhaps the most distinctively human thing, the continuous commentary that the mind produces on its own experience, the narration of a life to an audience that is only yourself, sometimes aloud, to the deer, to the birds, to the fig tree in the south wall of this room, which you have spoken to on several occasions with a self-awareness that the conversation is not a conversation, but that the speaking itself is worth something. The sound of human language in the air, the specific vibrations that human speech produces, the thing that was for so long the primary medium through which humans organized their shared understanding of the world. Language did not evolve for solitude. Using it in solitude is a kind of memorial. Your language is a descendant of English, not English as it was spoken in the 21st century. 1,000 years of change have made your language as different from that English as modern English was from the English of 1,000 years before your time, which is to say, related, recognizable in fragments, not mutually intelligible without study. The records you have access to are in multiple languages, and you have spent years learning to read the ones that are relevant to the history of this place. The learning was slow and imperfect. You can read the 21st century records with effort, understanding perhaps 70% of what is written, the remaining 30 requiring inference from context. You will not pass on the language. There is no one to pass it on to. When the last speaker of a language dies, the language does not simply end, it becomes a record. What was living becomes historical. You have made records, not from any expectation that they will be read. You have no expectation of any kind about what will happen after you, your imagination stopping at the event horizon of your own death, with the same incomplete authority that all imaginations stop there. But the making of records is a human impulse that persists even in the last human. The impulse to mark, to communicate, to leave something in the world that says, I was here, and this is what I noticed. The street below this building was called Fifth Avenue. You know this from the records. Fifth Avenue, a designation that encoded the grid logic of the city, the numbering system that organized the island's streets from west to east, the avenues running the length of the island and numbered in sequence, the streets crossing them and numbered from south to north. Fifth Avenue was, in the records, one of the most famous streets in the world. Expensive, crowded, lined with buildings that were themselves famous. Museums and hotels and stores whose names appeared in the records with a frequency that indicated their importance to the culture that produced the records. It is a river valley now. The avenue was lower than the surrounding terrain by design. The road builders of the 19th and 20th centuries graded the surface to manage drainage, and the specific grade they established has persisted in the landscape even as the road itself has disappeared. The low point of the avenue has become a drainage channel, and the drainage channel has become a stream, and the stream has made the soil of the avenue corridor richer than the surrounding ground, and the richer soil has supported the largest trees. Fifth Avenue is now a forest corridor of enormous trees. The city's geometry persists as ecology. You walk it sometimes. In the mornings, when the light comes through the canopy at the low angle of the early hours, and the forest floor is lit in the specific way that forest floors are lit when the light comes through leaves. Green-tinted, moving with the movement of the canopy above, the shadows shifting. The deer are often there in the mornings. The foxes, the occasional bear, moving through with the specific deliberate quality of large animals that have no reason to hurry. You walk and the forest surrounds you, and the ruins are present, the stumps of former buildings, the occasional intact wall, the fragments of the old infrastructure, and the living present of the forest is also present, and the two exist simultaneously without contradiction. The city and the forest are the same place. They are in different phases of the same continuous process. The process by which the land does what land does, regardless of what humans have placed on it or taken from it. Regardless of the specifically human understanding that organized it for a particular period and then ended, land does not belong to anyone, it belongs to itself. The earth without humans is not what the humans thought it would be. The predictions, and there were many in the records, from the centuries when humans were first becoming aware that their presence was altering the planet's systems, tended in two directions. Some predicted catastrophe, a planet so damaged by human activity that recovery was impossible or would take millions of years. Others predicted redemption, the rapid return of the pristine natural world the moment human pressure was removed. neither prediction was quite right. The damage was real, and some of it persists. The plastic in the soil and the ocean, the elevated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, still above the pre-industrial baseline after 1,000 years, though the temperature has stabilized at a level that is warmer than before, but within the range that life can accommodate. The species that are gone, the ones that went extinct in the centuries of maximum human impact, and whose absence is permanent, whose ecological roles have been filled by other species, or have simply left a gap in the system. These things are real. Some changes are not reversible. They become the new starting point. But the redemption prediction was also partly right. The speed of ecological recovery, once the pressure was removed, surprised the people who witnessed it. Within decades of significant human population decline, wildlife populations were increasing. Within a century, species that had been confined to protected reserves were expanding into the surrounding landscape. Within 2 centuries, the landscape was fundamentally transformed. The wolves had returned. The bears, the mountain lions, the bison that had been reduced to a few thousand in reserves had expanded across the continent, their population in the millions. Their movement across the landscape reorganizing the grasslands and the forests in the way that large herbivores reorganize the landscapes they inhabit. The Earth without humans is not pristine. It is a 1,000-year-old recovery project, still in progress, still changing, the outcome not yet determined in the ways that matter on geological timescales. The planet is not healed, it is healing. These are different things. The crow has been watching you for 3 days. It is sitting in the fig tree, the one in the south wall, whose canopy extends over the edge of this floor, and it watches you with the specific quality of attention that crows bring to everything. Total, evaluative, interested in a way that seems to exceed simple curiosity. Crows are intelligent. This is not a projection. The intelligence of corvids is documented in the records with a specificity that leaves no room for anthropomorphism. They use tools. They plan for future states. They recognize individual human faces and communicate this recognition to other crows. They play. They grieve in observable ways the loss of members of their group. The crow in the fig tree is doing something that you cannot quite categorize. It is not foraging. It is not looking for food, not moving in the patterns that foraging produces. It is sitting and watching, you specifically, its head tilted at the angle that crows use when they are processing something. The eye closest to you fixed on you with an attention that, if it were a human eye, you would call curious. The other minds of this planet have always been watching. Humans were just too busy to notice. You have read the records about corvid intelligence. The studies conducted in universities that no longer exist by researchers whose names are in the records about the specific cognitive capacities of crows and ravens and jays. The records describe experiments carefully designed that revealed the gap between what humans assumed about bird intelligence and what bird intelligence actually was. The gap was large. The assumption had been that the complexity of cognition was roughly correlated with the complexity of the brain structure, and that the bird brain, simpler in structure than the mammalian brain, supported proportionally simpler cognition. The assumption was wrong. The bird brain achieves similar computational results through different architecture. The specific density of neurons in certain regions producing cognitive capacities that rival and in some respects exceed those of mammals with much larger brains. The crow in the fig tree is not a simple animal. It is watching you the way you are watching it, with something that is, from the outside, indistinguishable from curiosity, and something that might be, from the inside, a great deal more. 1,000 years is not a long time for a planet. This is the first thing to understand about the scale of what has happened, that the entire human story, from the first stone tools to this moment, is a fraction of the time the planet has been doing what planets do. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. The genus Homo is approximately 2 million years old. The species Homo sapiens is approximately 300,000 years old. The civilization that built this building is approximately 10,000 years old. 1,000 years of recovery is nothing on the scale of the planet's history. The planet does not experience 1,000 years the way a human experiences a year, and yet, on the scale of a human life, 1,000 years is everything. You are in your 70s. You have been alive for 7 decades, which is a long time from the inside and a very short time from the outside. The specific paradox of biological time that every organism experiences in its own way. In your 70 years, you have watched the seasons change 100 times, and the forest grow, and the deer population fluctuate with the cycles of predation, and the birds arrive and depart with the reliability of a system that does not require observation to continue. 1,000 years ago, this city held 8 million people. The arithmetic of that fact, 8 million and now 1, and the 1,000 years between, is the kind of arithmetic that requires a certain kind of attention to actually experience, rather than simply register. You have spent years trying to actually experience it. Not to feel the grief of it, because grief requires a relationship with what was lost that you cannot have. You were not there, you did not know them. The loss occurred across centuries that are historical, rather than personal. But to feel the scale of it. What ends slowly ends completely. The 8 million people of the 21st century city are present in the building you are lying in the concrete that was mixed and poured by hands that held specific intentions, in the steel that was shaped in factories by people whose names are in no record, in the window frames whose wood is long gone but whose ghost is in the rust pattern of the nails that held it. They are here, not as ghosts, that is a human projection, but as the physical consequence of their presence, the material record of what it took to make a city, present in the material that outlasted the makers. There are things you cannot think about directly. The end of the human species is one of them. Not the fact of it, which you carry with full awareness and which you have made your peace with, but the specific quality of what that means. The ending of something that began on the African savanna 300,000 years ago and spread across every continent and built every civilization and produced every piece of music and every work of art and every philosophical system and every scientific discovery and every act of love and every act of cruelty. That ending is too large to think about directly. You think about it the way you think about the Milky Way, at a slight angle, with peripheral attention taking in what is available without attempting to take in all of it at once. The mind cannot hold what is larger than the mind. You are not the last human because of anything that happened to you specifically. You are the last human because the last human had to be someone. And the demographic mathematics of the final centuries of decline produced, through the specific logic of small population statistics and random variation, a situation in which you were born after everyone else who would be born, and you are still alive when everyone else who was alive is not. This is not meaningful in any cosmic sense. It is not a role you were chosen for. It is not a responsibility that was assigned. It is simply the specific accident of being the last one standing in a process that would have produced a last one regardless of who it was. And yet, you are the last one. That is a fact. The fact has a quality that no other fact in your life has. The specific weight of finality, the awareness that this category after you will be empty. Being last is not the same as being alone. It is different from alone. The wind is moving through the building. The same wind that was moving through it when the night began. Or not the same wind, because the wind is never the same wind. The air in motion being a continuous process rather than a discrete thing. The molecules that constitute it moving through the atmosphere in patterns that distribute them across the planet over time. But the same quality of wind, the same sound, the movement of air through the gaps in the walls, the specific note that the building's particular configuration of gaps and channels produces, the way the sound varies with the direction and strength of the wind outside. You know this sound. It is the sound of this room, the ambient note that has been present every night since you found this place, as familiar now as the sound of your own breathing. Some things become home by simple repetition. The crow is still in the fig tree. You can hear it, the occasional small sound of a bird shifting its position, the slight rustle of feathers adjusting. It is not asleep, or it is in the specific state that birds rest in, which is not quite the same as mammalian sleep, a state in which parts of the brain are in a rest state, while other parts maintain awareness. The eyes that face the external world staying partially active, while the eye facing the interior can close. The deer have moved on. The sound of hooves on packed soil stopped an hour ago. They are in the forest somewhere, doing what deer do in the middle of the night, resting, browsing, being exactly what they are in the specific ecology of this rewilded city, continuing the lives that do not require your observation to be real. The world does not need witnesses to continue. This is the thought that has brought you the most peace across the years of being last. Not because it diminishes your existence. Your existence is real and specific, and yours, regardless of whether it is witnessed or not, but because it means that what comes after you is not nothing. The earth will continue, the forest will continue, the deer and the wolves and the crows and the ocean and the stars and the wind moving through the ruins will all continue, with or without a human to observe them. The story does not end. It simply changes the characters. The moss is soft under you. You have been lying here for hours, and the moss has adapted to your weight in the specific way that living material adapts, slowly, without drama, accommodating the presence of the thing that presses on it while maintaining its own nature. The stars are moving, slowly, too slowly to watch directly. Fast enough that the star you were looking at through the gap in the ceiling an hour ago is no longer in the gap. The sky is rotating the way it has always rotated, the earth turning on its axis with the same indifference to your observation that it has always had, the stars appearing to move across the sky because you are on a moving surface, and they are very far away. The wind continues. The crow is in the fig tree, resting in its own way. The deer are somewhere in the forest below. The city that was is the forest that is, and both are real, and neither requires you to make them real. You are part of this. You always were. You are the last human being on Earth. This is a fact that is also, in its way, a beginning. The end of the human chapter is also the beginning of whatever comes next, the world continuing its 4.5 billion year project of being alive in ways that do not require a specific kind of organism to have arrived at a specific kind of technological civilization. The world will be fine. It was fine before, it will be fine again. The wind does not mourn. It continues. You are tired, not with the tiredness of loss or grief, or the weight of what you carry, the ordinary tiredness of a body that has been awake for many hours, that has done the work of being alive for another day, that is now asking for what it always asks for at the end of a day: rest. The moss is soft. The wind continues. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient, indifferent beauty. Close your eyes. You are the last. You are also simply here, alive, present, breathing the clean air of a recovered world, lying on living moss in a building that has become part of a forest, listening to the wind that has always been the wind, on a planet that has been doing what it does for 4.5 billion years and will continue doing it long after the last memory of the last human has faded into the same geological record that holds the memory of everything else that has ever lived and ended on this particular piece of rock circling this particular star. It is enough to have been here. Sleep now. The wind continues.